Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, after what seems like far too long, to an episode of World of Tanks with me, Gitbag the Great. Now, I know in recent times I have used World of Tanks as the background footage for my Gitcast podcasts, but I must apologise because I haven't really done a properly focused World of Tanks video in a very significant amount of time. So I figured what better thing to do to reintroduce ourselves to the world of Tanks reviews and highlight reels on this channel than with a tank that by and large is very well known throughout the community for being reasonably easy to use depending on the matchmaking and situation you get it in, because it is basically just put big gun in box and then on tank and shoot. I mean, you could say that's the basic premises of any tank, but each tank has their own tactical uses. The KV-2 Tier 6 Russian heavy tank, though, is basically a joke. It's pretty stupidly designed, as you can quite clearly tell. I'm not entirely sure what the reasoning behind this was, but by and large, when it was designed during the Winter War of 1938 to 41, the main purpose of it was to use it as a battering ram against the lines of Finnish soldiers that the Russians were having a hard time fighting against in the Malaman line in western Finland. So they kind of designed this from the KV-1, built a giant armoured box and put a 152mm howitzer into it in order to hope that it would be able to break through the Finnish defensive lines. In fact, it actually turned out to be a massive failure, and when the Germans came to invade Russia in the middle of 1941, the Russians ended up deciding, well, this doesn't really work so well against the Finns, let's try it against the Germans instead. And it actually worked out pretty well against the Germans during the tumultuous operations of Operation Barbarossa. So it was kind of used primarily against the Germans for the rest of the war. Now, it isn't the most tactically flexible tank, I must say. It's probably the least mobile and least tactically available or flexible and applicable of all the Russian Tier 6 tanks. I mean, of all of them, really, not just of the heavy tanks, but it's probably the most fun to use because it's just such a direct tank and it's so much sort of raw power in just such a simple design. It literally is just a tank, you know, just a KV-1 chassis with a giant box on top with a howitzer sticking out the front. It is Russian engineering at its finest. So let's go a little bit further into the details of this tank. Its main gun for choice is a 152mm howitzer to pick. There are a couple of other guns, namely a 122mm howitzer, which is probably the first gun you'll have on this thing, and a 107mm ZIS-6. I would just say just go with a 152mm howitzer as soon as you can, because quite realistically, it's the most fun you'll have with this thing. Besides, you'll get the 107 as the main gun on the T150, which coincidentally I already have, and is actually a really good tank as well. A bit more tactically flexible than this one, but it depends on what you like more. If you just like to have fun or like to play things a little bit more carefully and tactically. So let's look at the stats of this gun. First off, let me just point out, its dispersion, aiming time, and turret traverse speed and reload are all absolutely horrific. Aiming time of 3.41 and dispersion of 0.56, not to mention a turret traverse of 17.07 seconds, is pretty terrible. Probably the worst, though, is its reload time of 20.3 seconds, and that's without the upgrades. So I have to really put a lot of effort into making sure that this thing can operate at optimal loading time, because if you can't, and if you get yourself into a position where this thing can get outmaneuvered, you are screwed. Standard shell penetration isn't amazing either. It's 83 to 138, but then again, the main reason for this gun is to fire the high explosive ammo on it. The premium and standard armor-piercing ammo types are not terrible. I mean, if they penetrate, they do a shit ton of damage, but they're really not that worth it. The main purpose of this gun is just to blast people's modules off with the high explosive ammo, and if you penetrate something thinly armoured like a Hetzer or a TOG-2, then you can really just do all sorts of damage and do well over several hundred points of damage. The standard shell damage is actually very, very good. It's 525 to 875, depending on the circumstances, this could possibly be even higher, considering it's high explosive ammo and is even more, how shall we say, temperamental than armour-piercing ammo. The average damage per minute is about 2,074, depending on how fast you can fire this gun. Although really that is kind of the usual optimum, really, considering that it is high explosive ammo and this thing fires as slowly as continental drift. Then we go on to the survivability of this thing. Again, it's not great, but it's well enough. Like I said earlier, it's a KV-1 hull, so 75mm on the sides and front, 70 on the back. Same for the turret, although the turret is much less well armoured, even though it has the same thickness, just simply because it's pretty much all flat. So again, not a very tactically mobile vehicle. If you can get this thing hulled down, I wouldn't really bother, but its main purpose is just to poke out now and again to smack people in the sides with a whole load of fiery high explosive pain. Then mobility, again, not great. The engine power and weight to load limit is actually pretty good, but the specific power is pretty low and the traverse speed is pretty shit. The top speed of about 35 is not too terrible actually for a tank of this kind of height and size. The reverse speed is pretty standard at only about 11 kilometers an hour. Now, the concealment, well, basically non-existing. I mean, look at the freaking size of this thing. It's bigger than a fucking bungalow. Spotting, not really important. Then again, this is a tier 6 heavy tank, so what would you expect? View range of about 349 meters, signal range of about 572, so no real need to pay too much attention to that. Now, when you get upgrades for this thing, I would personally recommend lane drive, a rammer, and ventilation. The thing is, this isn't like, say, a E25 or a Sherman tank, where the rate of fire is one of the most, if not the most, defining thing about this thing. It's the most defining thing is its alpha damage of its high explosive ammo on the 152mm gun. But if you are going to go for upgrades, I would say go for those ones. As for consumables, I'd just say go with the standard usual mix of repair kit, health kit, fire extinguisher. It seems to do just fine, really. And again, yeah, there's really only one gun that is really appropriate for this tank, the 152mm M10 howitzer. As you can see there, average damage of 910 on its high explosive ammo, and only about 86 penetration. So half the time you will do nowhere near even a third of that damage, but the other half of the time you'll do a fair amount over that amount of damage, and then about 5% of the time you may even insta-kill a certain tank, depending on what kind of thing you're firing at. Maybe it's an RHM or possibly even a scout tank. So just pray to the gods that you'll get favourable matchmaking, because if you get put up against tanks with lots of spaced armour like IS-3s and KV-5s and you know, things like the E-75, well, that would be very rare unless you're in a feral platoon, but basically you would be in a very disadvantageous position, considering that high explosive only really does its full damage if it actually penetrates, and considering it doesn't have the same penetration ratings, so to speak, as standard armor-piercing or premium ammo, it's a bit more give and take, really, whether or not you'll do anywhere near the full amount of damage that high explosive ammo is advertised at on really any gun, to be honest. Now, for me personally, it's kind of just really up to what you fancy with the crew skills. The most important thing, though, I would say, just because of how slow this thing fires, is that you give both of the loaders, because keep in mind this is a 6-man tank, the safe stowage perk, because that is vital. If this thing gets its ammo rack or even one of its loaders damaged, it is near enough crippled. So keep in hand a health kit and give them both safe stowage, so you have an absolute, or at least mostly majority assurance that you will have a safe time of keeping your gun firing fast as you can. Of course, that's kind of a bit of a dichotomy when this thing fires at only about 3 shots a second, or a minute rather. So that's basically all I can really say in a technical sense about the KV-2. So let's go a little bit more into how it actually plays in-game, and how some of the history of it came to be, as we look into some of the replays we have of this absolute beauty of an armoured monstrosity. So, For our first replay of today, to feature the mightiness of all that is great about the KV-2, we're going to feature a little replay from here on Moravanka. This isn't the most eventful replay, so to speak, but it does show how much damage the KV-2 can do. If it doesn't penetrate, it can at least do a hell of a lot of damage to enemy modules. So you'll see the tank do a lot of that in this replay. It's very much a master of splash damage, shall we say. Even if you don't penetrate with this thing, it'll do some damage somewhere, let me tell you that. Now, at first I was a bit indecisive here where to go, because a lot of the heavy tanks were going towards the right, towards the Ridgeways of Doom, but I thought I'd go along with the lightweight tank destroyers and just light tanks and medium tanks towards the magical forest. Not the usual kind of stomping ground you'd find for a slower moving heavy tank on this map, but sometimes at the higher tiers when you'll find things like the AMX 5100 or the IS-3, you know, more mobile kind of heavy tanks, and what I would say would be heavy cavalry tanks, because while they are heavy tanks, they are noticeably mobile for their marking. You'll find those kind of things in the Magical Forest sometimes here on Moravanka. Usually, though, you'll find heavy tanks going in or around the Ridgeways of Doom on this map, which is very fair enough. One of the earliest replays, actually, I uploaded onto worldoftanksreplays.eu was the KV-4 replay of me on this map, on the other side of the map, the Ridgeways of Death, where I basically got a steel wall and did the most scouting damage on my entire team. I did barely any damage in that game. I think I did just under 800 damage because I only fired 2 penetrating shots. But God, I remember that game like it was yesterday, even though it was about 2 years ago now that I uploaded it. Probably even more than that, come to think. It was probably almost 2.5 years now that I uploaded that replay onto World of Tanks replays. But that's the kind of thing you can do if you're in a bigger, more heavily armoured tank on the Ridgeways. With something like the KV-2 where it is quite big profile, it's probably quite make a lot of sense to make use of the shadowed sort of concealment of the trees here in the Magical Forest. Now, if you're saying something like an OI that is a certainly larger amount more heavily armoured than the KV-2, then going to the Ridgeways of Doom might be a fair, sound choice, because you might be able to do some scouting there by rate of fire, so to speak, by getting the enemy to fire at you and reveal their positions, but the KV-2 not so much. Now, I know I'm kind of contradicting myself there by driving across this open map, which might seem a little bit iffy, considering what I've said before, that the KV-2 is not that mobile or very well armoured in terms of its turret, just because of how flat it is, but when you can do stuff like this, it kind of makes up for it, I think. That's a full health T-3476 tier 5 medium tank, one of the best tier 5 tanks in the game, and it's just been absolutely eviscerated in one fell swoop, just like that. Now, as you can see, the armour here on the turret isn't great. I'm getting repeatedly hit in the turret by the other T-3476 they've got, and you'll see here again, if you don't kill them, you're more than likely to do a metric butt-ton of module damage. Sorry, not to that tank, because I did kill him again, but then again, he was on very low health. But you'll see what I mean in a minute when I fire at the tanks that are on the ridgeline. Now, the Churchill 7, sorry, my mistake, gets a little bit tasty, so I think, alright, you're tracked, I'm going to give you some of the good old Russian communist treatment. Bang, right in the sides. Now, that's a bit more impressive, because the Churchill 7 is one hell of a lot more armoured than the T-3476, and it has a bit more reliable armour than the KV-2. The KV-2's armour is a bit trollish, not just to the enemy, but also to the driver, because it can be a bit unreliable here and there, considering how flat it is on the turret. But then again, I have reflected or bounced RHM shells on the turret of this thing, so it's a bit temperamental. Again, VK here, very unfortunate. Not really so much of me doing massive module damage in this game, more so just outright butchering opposing tanks. And even then, a couple of them have been very low health. But then again, you'll see with this thing, it's kind of just an opportunity tank. If you see a good opportunity to fire, just pump shells into them, because it doesn't really have the rate of fire to do something like, say, pin the enemy down, like, say, the T-150 would, or the the tier 6 French heavy, the ARL 44, even though that thing gets a 105mm gun, one of the biggest guns at tier 5 on any tank, it does have a considerably more impressive rate of fire than most tanks of its type at tier 5, so it's certainly a dangerous beast. Right, now here's what you'll see. Now, I don't penetrate and kill this Hellcat, which is very rare because it's a very lightly armoured machine, but you'll see what I just did there. One shot and I've destroyed one of its tracks, damaged the other, and damaged its engine. So hopefully that should show the sheer power of the KV-2, that even if it doesn't kill an enemy outright, even if it's a lightly armoured one like the Hellcat, it'll more than likely do a lot of module damage. And if this replay doesn't convince you, then let me show you something else. So now, once again, we have a very favourable matchmaking situation here on Tundra this time. A much more tumultuous and, I'd say more unpredictable map, really, than Murvanka. Murvanka is usually a very predictable map to play along if you know what you're doing and if there is a particular kind of layout of tanks that have been attributed to each team. Murvanka is a pretty predictable map. Tundra, on the other hand, is quite a strange one because you've got at least like 6 or 7 approaches to either side of the map, so it's certainly a strange one. And even then, you've got several sub-routes that connect to the ends of each route, so this is a very, very strange map, and it's got a lot of cover as well, even though there are also a lot of open spaces, so it's certainly one where you can stretch your tactical muscles. It's a good map, don't get me wrong, it's just it's one that will throw you for a loop sometimes, depending on what kind of situation you find yourself in, so you need to play very carefully on this map, let that be said. Now, I might be making a bit of a tactical error here by going up the Valley of No Return by myself, with only a Cromwell behind me, who seemingly is just sitting there picking his nose, not realising that by sticking together we have a better chance of things. But then again, I'm going up here head-on by myself, so I kind of can't really have any foot to stand on. Although, to be fair, I've also got the Cromwell, plus an OI, plus a T50 coming up behind me, and not only that, but we've also got a Lux and an M5A1 scouting ahead of us, so pretty strong position. And to be fair, while the position ahead of us near the train tracks at the enemy base is easily defendable, the enemy seemingly don't want to defend it, because basically they end up just bayonet charging us head on and seemingly make no use of the defence position that they do have. Now, this is kind of a bit of a boon to us, because a lot of the tanks you can see at the top of their team are very powerful ones indeed, like the new French tier 6 medium, the very, very dangerous Japanese OI, and here you'll see what I mean. If you don't penetrate and kill something outright with a KV-2, you will do a metric butt-ton of damage to its modules and armour. I might not have done so much damage to its modules, but I've destroyed its track, which can come to great assistance to my allies when they're shooting at the damn thing. So definitely utilise that. If there are enemy tanks grouped together, or there's one that's giving your allies trouble, try and punt it in the sides so you can track it down and give your allies a chance to put some more damage into it. Again, with that VK there, I tracked him again, but the second time round I also damaged his U-port and killed his gunner, so that's an added bonus for me. Now, you might be wondering why I bounced the shot from that opposing KV-2 there, and the reason for that is that he actually doesn't have the 152mm gun there. He, unlike me, has the 107mm Zis gun, which is a very, very good gun on the T150. On the KV-2 it's also pretty good as well, it's a very good sniping gun, but on the KV-2 it's kind of a bit moot, because the T150 can kind of hold down a lot more than the KV-2 can, and snipe away a lot more than KV-2 can, because all of the guns that the T150 gets are rather accurate, apart from the 120mm U11. The KV-2 is not designed for that by and large, even with the unupgraded turret, so you really might as well just go with the 152mm howitzer. The T150 is much more suited to much more accurately shooting, shall we say. Not even just with the guns it gets, but just by design. So you'll see here again, did a whole bunch of damage. Even if I didn't, you know, kill him outright, I probably injured his gunner or something, maybe damaged one of his tracks. And fair play to that guy, you know, because he was doomed. His team were doing terribly. And you know what? He thought he'd go out with style, ramming an OOI with absolute gusto and just going out with style and bravery. The tale to rival the legends of old, you know? So we'll go now into the final replay where we'll see how the KV-2 can be used to hopefully slightly more important tactical situations. So, for our final replay, we have a magnificent little clash here on the mighty map that is Derpenberg, or known to you noobs as Erlenberg. Now this is a really, really weird map. This is kind of has the same basic predictability of Muravanka, but you'll find situations on this map sometimes that just boggle the mind. It should, by and large, by its design, be a tactically inflexible map, but it really isn't. It's actually quite open and tactically flexible if things go in the right way, shall we say. Kind of like a map on Tundra, or a game on Tundra rather. You'll sometimes find situations on this map that you just think should not happen, but they do, and they do happen quite regularly actually. As you may see in this map, you'll see tanks in positions where they just shouldn't be, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. The valley I'm going to now is kind of generally reserved for tanks with great gun depression and medium tanks and light tanks. You'll very rarely find slow-moving heavy tanks like me and this T1 here. Sorry, no, that's an M6, my mistake. Advancing up this valley, because we're just not really kind of built for this kind of position. So you could say we're making a tactical error by moving up here, but then again, it's kind of useful for the light tanks and medium tanks up here to have a bit of extra muscle just to push the line a bit. And to be fair, the enemy have also brought their own heavy tank up here, the Tier 5 British Premium, the Excelsior. Just a pity for them that the Excelsior is absolute shite. It is a garbage piece of crap. It's kind of a money sponge, really, but if you want to get it, go ahead and get it, because in the right hands it can actually be decent enough if it gets into Tier 5 and 4 matchmaking. Don't worry, I'm pretty sure it's got premium matchmaking. You'll have to look that up for yourself though, but it's a pretty pants tank, to be honest. I mean, even the VK3001H, as pants that is still a bit better than the Excelsior. And again, you'll see something there. Half the time when you aim this thing, it just doesn't hit at all. It's kind of like the troll cannon. Not in the same way though, because the troll cannon is by and large supremely trollish above any other gun in the game. This thing will hit a fair bit of the time, but it's kind of like the old Mighty Jingle says. If you sacrifice enough dissidents to Stalin, he will reach up from hell and guide your shot to the truest target. I didn't even aim fully at that Excelsior there, and I damaged both his tracks, killed his viewport, and killed his gunner. So you could say Mighty Jingles is being maybe a bit overly expressive, but then again, it basically happened for me there, so he's not wrong really, is he, to be honest. So now that we've removed the main anchor of the defence on this side of the map for the enemy, we are just pummeling forwards, pushing back their remaining light tanks. This is a couple of minutes before I realised, if you look to the north, the northern side of the map near where our base is, because this is an attack and defend mode sort of match, and we're on the defending team, you'll realise that our side of the river is looking pretty dire. It might not look immediately dire, so to speak, but because there's only like one heavy tank and one medium tank there, but soon enough it will get pretty bad, and it's at that point I suddenly realised that I've got to go back, and it's probably at the point where I realised that the KV-2 had just popped up on the map and that the Skoda was still lurking around there, and my predictions were proven true when the Skoda comes back and kills the Su-85 near the base with the Su-100 and Wolverine. So me, the Jackson, the KV-220 and the Firefly all, you know, rally ourselves and start pouring backwards. The Jackson makes probably the smartest move out of the four of us really, and decides to set up shop on top of the hill near the defending base, just so he can hopefully get off some sniping shots, and he stays up there for a couple of minutes just to provide a bit of fire support until it's safe to come back down, because the enemy still have a bit of arty, so you might as well stay up there getting sheltered by the building while me, the other KV and the Firefly will come down and try and blast away. Now, I lose sight of the KV-2, but I kind of take an opportunity shot. I don't think I really did any damage. If I did, I probably just damaged his tracks. So I decide to push on a bit, and then get a bit of a rude surprise when the enemy KV-2 pops up again right there. I kind of get a bit spooked out, and I decide again to go for another shot of opportunity, and I am supremely lucky that he doesn't penetrate my side and do much more damage here. I do considerably more damage to him, and plus I also knock out both his track and his radio operator and damage his engine, so I gave him a considerably harder time than he did to me, and then he gets killed by our Jackson. I suppose you could say I was remarkably lucky because, to be honest with you, I was presenting my side to him, and the side of the KV-2 is remarkably trollish. Again, not just to the enemy team, but also to yourself. Sometimes it will reflect the most brutal of cannon fire, but then half the time it will just do absolutely nothing. Fortunately enough, the same can't be said of the Churchill 7. You get to a certain point and you will be able to put something significant through the side of the Churchill 7, because as heavily as it is, and it is heavily armoured, there's a point at which it's got to break, because it's not as trollish or communist as the KV-2 really. Fortunately enough, now I have the Sherman Firefly with me to back me up and give me a bit of extra muscle, but both of us are kind of on lower health, so we kind of just wait and sit back for the KV-220 to come round, kill the Skoda, and hopefully reset the cap. And it's only at the last moment that Skoda realises he's screwed up, and the KV-220 basically kicks the living shit out of him, which is more than welcome. Now the scores are level, and we've kind of got a bit of a breathing space as the VK is eviscerated again by the KV-220, and I decide to go and pop around for another shot of opportunity at the OI and end up blasting his head clean off. Now this is the point where the game dies down for a bit, and not really anything kind of happens, to be honest. I'll be honest. I get shot at a couple of times by the A1 in kind of a stupid decision on my part to move over the bridge. I thought I'd act as a sort of forward advanced position, not so much as a scout, because like I said in the beginning, the spotting and radio range of this thing isn't really great enough to spot for your tanks unless you go by trial of fire, as I mentioned in the previous two replays. So I decide to just stay here and act as an advanced position. If I spot anyone, it will be by proximity to decking, so hopefully my teammates will be able to do that. But the problem is that we're all on significantly low health, especially me and the Hellcat, so we have to be exceptionally careful. The only thing that is kind of annoying though is that the Firefly continues nattering on in chat about tactical options that are admirable but aren't really viable at this point. I mean, he's not as annoying as map spammers, but I can understand his sentiment. Unfortunately, he does get pounded into the ground by the Gorilla, who makes an absolutely superb shot. I'm not sure if he makes a call of judgment or if the Firefly was actually being scouted, but it's a very important kill by the Gorilla because he was one of the best players on our team, the Firefly. However, I then spot the tank that probably scouted him, the Matilda, and, well, he was being a bit of a nuisance, so he had to go. Unfortunately, this is kind of when my luck starts to run out, so unfortunately there's not really much else I can say for my performance in the rest of this game. To be fair, I was a bit unlucky during this game. I could have gotten more kills if I'd penetrated with shots a bit more, but then again, you take with what you may. I do feel kind of proud of my performance though in this game, because even though I ended up not doing a huge amount overall, I kind of ended up acting as like an armoured spearhead for the defence of our base near the end. And even though I did get killed by the Gorilla, I helped act as a forward advanced position for the rest of our team, so much so that we were able to, I think, at least prolong the assault of our base by about 30 or 40 seconds, which is decent enough, I think. Especially near the end on a assault defence mode, so I think that's pretty good running for a top tier heavy tank. The Jackson tries to go out and be a bit ballsy with the A1, but I wouldn't recommend it really, mate. You've got a Gorilla staring at you on 4 kills, and there you go. That you just made my point for me. Just Really? Really? Alright, well, you know what? He got 3 kills, he helped defend the base. I'll let him off for that. But to be fair, I am still proud with the performance that the team made overall. The bottom third of the team didn't do so great, but everyone else, I think, did a decent enough job. The KV-2 here had a particularly brilliant game. He did really well for a tank that wasn't even top tier, with a tank that doesn't even have that particularly a great gun for the game he's playing in. But much like the first encounter between the Germans and the KV-2 in the Second World War, I think once it was just him against the last 2 tanks on the enemy team, they kind of didn't really fully know what to do with him, because he was such a big, powerful target that he could just overpower them by sheer weight of force. I mean, the one thing that the KV-2 will have over the KV-2, aside from its better armour, is the fact that it does have a higher rate of fire and slightly more reliable penetration, shall we say. In fact, actually, that's a good tale to tell, because the KV-2 is by and large a stupid tank. But sometimes you will be able to do truly heroic things, like the first encounter between the Germans and the KV-2 in the Second World War. Now, for those of you who don't know, this was mentioned in one of Jingle's episodes of, I believe it might have been Mingles with Jingles, quite some time ago, where he goes through the tale of the first encounter between the Germans of Operation Barbarossa during the initial invasion of Russia in 1941, and a single lone KV-2 standing atop a road, blocking the path of an entire mechanised German regiment. Now, the German regiment was held up for an entire day by one KV-2 that had no support. 5 men held off an entire German armoured mechanised light regiment for about a day, and it was only when the Germans managed to roll up about 3 or 4 anti-tank guns behind the KV-2, pummel it repeatedly from point-blank range, and then chuck what must have been about a dozen grenades inside, if maybe a bit less than that, but that's probably a bit of an exaggeration. And only then did they finally manage to declare victory. That is how much of a baller machine the KV-2 is. Honestly, read up on the research of this thing on the tank wiki. It is fascinating. It's utterly stupid, this tank, but it is brilliant. And for all you could say negatively about the Soviet Union, and believe me, there was a lot, if you could say one good thing, by God, they made the KV-2. And that's not enough to excuse the millions of deaths, but tell you what, it's good enough for this channel. How about that? Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed the first World of Tanks review I've done on my channel in what seems like far too long. And hopefully you'll stick around again sometime soon. I will be probably uploading a bit more World of Tanks or World of Warships content, but don't worry, I'll still also be doing my Star Wars Jedi Academy playthrough in the near future as well. So stick around for all of that, and until next time, I hope you've enjoyed this video, if not found it informative, and as always, stay safe, don't do anything I wouldn't do, have fun with whatever you're doing, and until next time, I've been Gitbag the Great, and I'll see you guys on the battlefield.